Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the second of our festivals and events webinars for spring 2024. I'm Nora Fever, and I work with the Gros Morne Institute for Sustainable Tourism. And I just want to thank you all for taking some time to join us this morning. I think we're going to have a really interesting session. We're thrilled to be working again with Festivals and Events Ontario to bring you these webinars. And specifically, we work with Debbie Mann, who is our host for the morning. And I'm going to turn it over to Debbie in just a moment, but I just want to remind everyone that following the session, a quick survey will pop up on your screen. And if you could just take a few minutes just to complete that, it'll only take a minute or two. Those surveys are super important to us because it helps us to plan for future webinars. So if you have any thoughts, comments on today, but also on things you'd like to see in the future in terms of topics, then it's great if you can take a minute to fill that out. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it right over to Debbie.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Nora. I love doing this with you. I really do enjoy doing this with you so much. So welcome to the Thursday GMIST information session for, excuse me, as I, excuse me on that one, but this Thursday, and excuse me. And we're excited to have Jolene MacDonald with us from Accessibrand. I've known Jolene for close to 20 years now. We've done some work with her here at Festivals and Events Ontario with branding. Actually, she designed our logo about 18 years ago, and we're still using it. So it's still relevant today, and we're very excited. So Jolene is now into supporting and promoting and helping companies with accessibility on a digital level. She will, of course, go through all of that with you. And so welcome, Jolene. Really excited to have you on board. It's been a long time, and looking forward to hearing what you're offering here on this session.
Thanks, Debbie. So I guess it's over to me then, is it?
It is.
Awesome. I just want to just check. I'm letting everyone know I'm actually calling in from Sick Kids Hospital. So this is part of disability. So this is not my usual setting. So I'm hoping everything sounds okay. I'm connected to 5G on my phone. So this is, I just wanted to preface that in case I have any glitches or anything like that. But we're just going to start off the presentation. If I'm talking too fast or if someone needs something, please let me know. I'm reading off my notes on my laptop as well as Jay forwards everything on. But again, thank you, Debbie. My name is Jolene, and I am the founder of a company called Accessibrand. Thanks to FEO and Gros Morne for this opportunity to speak with everybody today. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about me and my business and the importance of digital accessibility in marketing and why you really need to learn about it and how you can integrate it into your businesses and organizations and your practices. At the end, I hope that we'll have some time for Q&A, but I did provide a checklist or like a handout to Debbie and Jay and Nora, so that can be given to everybody on the list. And I'm always free for consultations after this. My email will be at the end. So with that, Jay, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So here's me. It's a little older. Funny enough, that photo is taken in Prince Edward Island. That's where most of my family is from. So seeing all these backgrounds, I was saying, is making me miss the East Coast. I'm hoping to go back in the summer. But essentially, Accessibrand is based on my 24 years. I think I'm 25 now, 25 years being a graphic designer, and I've been self-employed for about 21. But I started Accessibrand because of my own personal story. So you'll see here, I have sort of an insert of myself and my youngest daughter who's in the front. She was born with a rare form of dwarfism in 2011. That's why we're at Sick Kids now. She's actually having her spine straightened, fused, and rods and pins. So it's one of those big things. And I was actually diagnosed with something called Ehlers-Danlos in 2017. So it was all of these medical issues and advocating for my kids that I was trying to figure out how to balance being a mom and, you know, disability and having all of that. So I left my other business and then began freelancing. And then during COVID, applied to accelerators and I relaunched to what Accessibrand is today. Accessibrand means accessible branding, but we've grown sort of in leaps and bounds in what our content is and our structure just in the last few years. But it was really because of these life experiences that I created this agency. And there's many other people with disabilities and professionals that were also caretakers that can't work. We can work, but we just need to work in our own way. So if Jay, you can go to the next page, please. Thank you. So essentially, Accessibrand is Canada's first accessibility-focused collective of design, marketing, communications professionals, and all of us have lived disability experience. If one of us doesn't have an actual disability ourselves, it's because of their child or their parent. So they have all of that personal connection. And as far as we know, in Canada specifically, there's no other agency that has this lived experience. But because we offer sort of all the services in one rather than dealing with 3 or 4 companies, we feel like we're pretty unique and we're able to practice what we preach, so to speak. And it makes us the experts. The picture on screen is just a few of our team members. We're basically a collective. So we have a few on payroll and the rest are all contractors. I didn't ask, is anyone visually impaired? I can describe the photos on the screen better. So if anyone needs me to do that, I'm happy to do so. I don't see there any hands up or no, everyone's okay? Okay, perfect. So just another digital accessibility thing that we forget about, that sometimes we need to explain that. So if you can go to the next screen, Jay, that'd be great. Thank you. So essentially, we only have an hour. I'll try and get through as much as I can. But these are a few of the objectives that we want to try and achieve through me talking for this next bit. What is digital accessibility? Who needs to comply? That's a very open statement. The statistics in Canada, why accessible marketing matters, where to integrate it, how to integrate it, and how to be better advocates. So if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So basically, what's digital accessibility? People know about accessibility, they know about disability, but a lot of people don't understand digital accessibility. So we're very much used to everyone looking at, ramps and push buttons and things like that. But I'll never forget the day I found out that people that are blind or have other types of disabilities cannot access digital information. And it was like, I had to change everything that I did. But essentially, digital accessibility is the practice of designing and developing digital content, software, and technology in a way that ensures people with disabilities can equitably interact with those digital elements. The goal is really to provide an inclusive user experience for everybody. And as I mentioned, just as we put physical accessibility in place for building standards, we now need to do the same for digital spaces and products. So if we go to the next one. So I'll spin through these fairly quickly. I think based on everyone's positions, you may know these definitions as they come from the Accessible Canada Act. But one of the things that we like to talk about is a barrier. So what is a barrier and how do we remove those barriers? Barriers as defined by the Accessible Canada Act means anything physical, architectural, technological, or attitudinal, anything that is based on information or communication, or anything that is a result of a policy or a practice that hinders the full and equal participation. I'm not going to read the whole thing because we only have limited time, but that gives you an idea of the definition of barrier. If you go to the next slide, please, the disability definition. So as most of you know, or maybe some of you don't know, but the explanation of a disability, a lot of people think a disability is something more obvious, like being in a wheelchair, but it's really not the case. Personally, I with my Ehlers-Danlos, most of the time you can't tell that I have a disability unless I start limping or I decide to use my cane that day. But disability is defined by the Accessible Canada Act, means any impairment, including a physical, mental, intellectual, cognitive, learning, communication, or sensory impairment, or a functional limitation. It can be permanent, it can be temporary, or episodic in nature, or evident or not, that in the interaction with the barrier hinders a person's full and equal participation. So it's really important that we talk about that. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm not disabled. There's nothing wrong with the word disabled, by the way, and it really is a personal preference. Some people choose not to say they're disabled or they have a disability. It's a first person preference. I personally am part of a community that is taking back that word, and that we're proud of, to say that we have that. But if you go to the next slide, please. I think ableism is a bigger one. It's the biggest barrier that people with disabilities face. It's ableism. It's the pity model. It's the charity model. It's the medical model. It's the patriarchal model. Ableism is really when someone thinks they know best for someone with a disability when they don't. It's us as the people with disabilities that know best for us, unless you're in a position where you have a caregiver. But these attitudes generally get in the way, even in digital accessibility. So we like to talk about that. So even after today, if you think about your own ableistic biases, we all have them. I still have them. Nobody's perfect. We are all learning. It's just like anything. We learn, we change, we move on. It's like word choices. There's some words we don't use anymore and some that we are still having a hard time getting away from. But ableistic biases can pop up in all sorts of things, including design, marketing, and communications, images, especially content. So it's really good to be aware of that. And this is actually coming from Inclusion Canada. So if you would like to check that out, I can also send a copy of this PDF after. The link is on the screen to Inclusion Canada. We can go to the next slide. So who needs to comply? So I think many of us are familiar that it's different all across Canada. It's different in the US. There are only specific types of businesses specifically in Ontario, and I'm going to talk about Ontario more because we're a little farther than every other province. But if you only abide by the rules in your province, I want you to think about how unfair it would be to leave certain populations out. And the next slide, I'll show you those populations. So it's really not that difficult to start integrating better work processes to include everyone, regardless of the law. In Canada, several entities and organizations are encouraged or required to comply with digital accessibility standards. Those specifics vary from province to province. And I know Nova Scotia specifically has bigger ones. But as of, I think it was January 1st, 2021, the Ontario AODA, as well as all large not-for-profits and public sectors and businesses with 50 plus employees, had to make sure their internet websites conformed with what's called WCAG or WCAG, the Worldwide Consortium of Accessibility. I can't remember the acronym. That's terrible. It's because I'm sitting here in a not in my office, but 2.0 level AA. We're actually up to 2.2 now. And I'll explain the WCAG a little bit more. But other rules are different for under 50 employees too. So it really can get convoluted. But I think the thing I'd want everyone to think about is just don't leave anyone out. If you know, and try and change how you're doing things, whether you apply to those rules or not. If we can go to the next slide, Jane. So this puts things into perspective, I think, a lot for people. I actually had to update this. There's a new stat scan that came out this year. I anticipate even in Canada that this is higher because of long haul COVID, but many people don't know about accessibility unless it's for building requirements, ramps and handrails and buttons. Some are more in depth than others, some are very vague. But if you look at the chart here, 27% of the Canadian population are identifying as having a disability. So this would be likely based off the disability tax credit. This is how they're getting this information. There's a lot of people with disabilities that don't get the disability tax credit. I just updated the stat in Ontario alone, 2.9 million. Globally, 1.3 billion. So I looked up the Maritimes, and Nova Scotia has the highest disability rate. It's appeared. I could be wrong, but this is the stats that I was finding. It said that 37.9%, and you saw a 7.6% increase. And then there was New Brunswick, which climbed to 8.6%, which to a 35.3% increase. And then Prince Edward Island had a disability rate of 31.8% after a 5.8% increase. And then Newfoundland, I looked up the Breaking Barriers NL, and it said that 1 in 4 people in Newfoundland have a disability. So I think it's pretty critical, even on the East Coast, that we make sure that we change some of our practices. But accessibility is really an opportunity for all businesses to be more inclusive, and you can reach more people, which can bring in more revenue. So it's really much more than physical and just checking off lists for laws. We go to the next page. So why does it matter? Why should you include it? A lot of people are very overwhelmed by accessibility, and rightly so. There's a lot of things to learn. But at the basics of it all, practicing and learning how to make your marketing and design accessible really doesn't have to be that difficult or cost a lot more money if you are starting to integrate it into the beginning rather than much later. In fact, if you integrate it into your workflow from the beginning, it's going to save you money in the long run. Right now, a lot of people are in Band-Aid solutions. You know, you can't overhaul a whole website. There's too much, you know, there's not enough budget. I totally understand that. But we also know that if we're going to build something new, like a building, we don't build without these features. So we should think about and learn about how we can do that with digital. Essentially, accessible marketing really benefits everyone, not just those with disabilities. And you also should remember that I mentioned earlier, everyone will have a disability at some point in their lives. Whether you have broken your arm or gotten into an accident or you're aging, like we all end up with that at some point in our lives. So if your design processes are intentional and human-centered, then you can think about that and you can integrate it into what you're doing. And if you can figure out target audiences, but we really can't figure out who has and who doesn't have a disability. So you can know that your audience is maybe female 20 to 55, but let's assume that if it's 1 in 4 people are going to have a disability, it's another piece for you to think about. We can go to the next slide. Okay, sorry, I just had to flip my own notes here. I think it's important for people to understand how and where to integrate accessibility. It essentially can be into anything. It can be very minor, it can be major, but accessibility is more than a website or a PDF, which is where most people start. There's a lot of presence in the internet about adding these plugins or overlays that have a little person in a wheelchair or like that has their hand sticking out and it's like this button that pops up from your website. I will tell you that they look great and they look like they're very cheap and affordable, but they're actually not good. It's another story or topic for another day, but accessible overlays for websites are Band-Aids. And for people that use screen readers that are blind especially, they generally block their access or it takes them twice as long. So if it's something that you're considering and you want to talk about it, please feel free to email me. We also have a blog on our website about it that I can send, but I just wanted to add that in there because it's very prominent these days. But you can implement accessibility into your websites, your video, your print materials even. I say digital, but print still applies because of contrast and fonts and things. Any of your graphic design needs. Social media has a whole other piece. I partner with a company called Squarely Accessible. We're probably pretty much joining forces all the time. And she teaches about social media and how you can change your content and make sure it's accessible with emojis and hashtags and things like that. But everything from print media to social media, e-newsletters, reports, and so on, essentially accessible and inclusive design just means that you're creating tools that everyone can use rather than just a select few, and you're creating or removing the barriers and you don't need to fix it later. Okay, so we go to the next slide. So a lot of people want to know how to get started. It can be very overwhelming. You already have lots on your plate, in your job, but we don't necessarily have enough time to learn everything today. But you can start with the points on the screen to help you on your journey to making your marketing accessible. And if you're not sure where to start, as always, feel free to reach out to me, email or phone call. But you would read what we call the WCAG guidelines. Nobody really wants to read them, I tell you. They're very clinical and technical. But that is a good start. Start understanding color contrast and color combinations. There is people out there that will say that there's colors that are not accessible. I can tell you every color can be accessible, but there is rules applied to it. It's how you use them, what color on what color, what font size on which other, but there are options for all. So if you're thinking about, oh my gosh, my brand is, light green or orange, it's not accessible, you've checked the contrast, there's ways around it. There's ways to make rules. We are working with HR Tourism Canada right now. They have like bright orange and light gray, two of the worst colors on the planet for accessibility, but we're making rules and adding some other combinations to it. So it will work really well for them. But using more basic fonts and staying away from scripts and things like that, we leave them for birthday parties and weddings now. Simpler grids, alt text, if everyone knows what alt text is about. That's important for you to add to anything online. Try and find out where that little feature is on Instagram or social media. And if all else fails, add an image description to your post. So if you put up a photo, say, image one, and then describe what you're seeing in that as part of your post at the end, it's really great add on for people, especially if someone has vision issues but isn't completely blind. There's a rule of thumb, it's like the trifecta: never do anything by color or text or an icon alone. It should be a combination of icon, text, and color together, because someone may have English as a second language. That's not a disability, but that's an accessibility principle. So they may not understand the word, or if someone's colorblind, they may not understand interpret the color properly. So if you have icon, text, and color together, use authentic images, and what that means, I should say. We have a course I'll talk a little bit about later, but if you're going to use images of people with disabilities in your materials, which I encourage you to do so, because we want to see that representation. It's just like the BIPOC community, LGBTQ. We want to see representation from our population, is make sure they're authentic. So that's a whole session unto itself, but when you go onto stock photography, which many of us do, a lot of those wheelchairs are like the ones I'm seeing here at Sick Kids that you just grab and use for the day. They're not real wheelchairs, or you don't want to have someone with a blanket on their lap pushing a wheelchair. You want to show independence. You want to show that they're just living their lives as, someone with a disability. It's not a big deal. Having transcripts for your videos, podcast is really, really crucial. If someone can't see or hear it, they can read it in some way using their technology or plain language. Has everyone heard of plain language? That's going to be the first rule under the Accessible Canada Act. The government of Canada is pushing everyone to go to plain language. So if you think about a newspaper, they're generally written, I think it's a grade 7 or 8 level. They are pushing to have everything written in a language that is simpler and understandable. It benefits people with cognitive, but it also benefits people with English as a second language. And if you think of deaf community, English is not their first language. Sign language is often their first language. So it's important to think about the type of language and what grade level it is. And there's a whole system of how you can grade it. Even if you use Word or Hemingway, you can do your own grading and it will tell you the level. Accessible documents. Everyone should be outputting an accessible document. If you had the opportunity to take any courses to do so, it is time consuming, but Word docs are probably the most accessible if you don't have anything fancy in them. And the whole idea of an accessible Word document is you're basically coding it so someone with a screen reader can read it. Because if you had something in like columns, a screen reader reads left to right. It's not going to know that it's in columns. And it'll also put in the order of reading for them. And you have to code that kind of like a website. And while it might sound daunting, the Microsoft Office products are fairly intuitive, and there is accessibility checkers that you can use. So I encourage you to go to Microsoft and look at some of their how-to videos. They're really, really phenomenal. Take online courses. I will promote that we have one. My partner from Squarely Accessible has one, but there are many online as well. LinkedIn Learning has some really fantastic ones. But also test everything. If you have friends, family, coworkers that have disabilities, I would encourage you to have them review it and get their input on it. Plain language as well. If you know anyone that is on the spectrum or has a cognitive issue, have them read it. Do they understand it? Also, if you're taking their time, I also suggest that you offer compensation. That often happens in the disability community, that we are not offered compensation because they're doing us a favor, which really shouldn't be the way. So I also like to add that in. But if you can go to the next screen. Thank you. So this is the WCAG, or people call it WCAG. So there it is, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it's funny because acronyms are not plain language and they're technically not accessible. So here they are in the middle of content, and we have all kinds of them. But so Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it refers to what Web, or WCAG 2.0 refers to Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which were published by the World Wide Web Consortium. So essentially, it's people globally that have gotten together and made up these rules about what makes web standard. And while they are standard to web, we actually apply these principles to all other media because of the principles that they are. They talk about contrast, they talk about font size. So we use these as the bases. But I wanted to explain a little bit more. And like every province and country is going to have their own laws. We really do advise following the international standards because it will make you the most accessible. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines explains how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. They cover websites, applications, and other digital content. And there's 3 levels of conformance. So if you ever see someone say, oh, well, which level of WCAG are you? There's A, which is the minimum level. Then there's AA, which includes the A and AA requirements, and that's on their website. Many organizations, and this is what we push for, is 2.1, 2.2 AA. Anything under AA is still very basic and hard for people that use technology to access information. And AAA includes all from A, AA, and AAA. And we're not seeing a lot of AAA. It's very, very stringent, but AA makes a lot of people all over the world very happy. So if you can go to the next slide. So essentially, how can you be accessible? I think that's a lot of people, well, how am I going to do this? There's so many things you can do to become more accessible and inclusive, but I will encourage you to do basic learning. And basic learning you can apply to any tactic or marketing idea. We're always happy to help. There's some other people out in the industry, obviously, that can help, but everyone should start somewhere. So instead of worrying about not being accessible, start asking others how you can be. And it's a journey that everyone is really on together, to be fair. I mentioned hiring people with disabilities or engaging the people that are already in your organization that self-identify as having a disability. Train your in-house teams, apply best practices, ask online. There's a lot of forums. There's a lot of groups on Facebook particularly, and there's some on LinkedIn, just like digital accessibility or disability-based groups. Again, take more courses, join forums, and hire experts to help you do that. But mostly just start asking. You can create your own accessibility advisory committee or go to your local one. I sit on our local municipal one. And a lot of times you can reach out and maybe your project is not a municipal one, but maybe you can engage with the people that are on there. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is not my photo, but this is one that's common out there. But accessibility benefits everyone. And I think when we look at this, that accessible design creates an inclusive environment that benefits not only people with disabilities, but also the general population. So if you think of a parent with a stroller and curb cuts were developed for wheelchairs, but everyone benefits from them. It's the same on the digital side. If we all focus on clear communication, ease of use, adaptability to make products and services more user-friendly and effective, regardless of abilities and circumstances, everyone wins. So digital accessibility is really simply good for business. If you think about 27% of the population you're leaving out, it's a great opportunity. We remove the barriers, we're removing the societal issues. And as you see by the illustration on the screen, everyone thinks we should just give everyone equally the same thing, which creates equality. But then you look at equity where you're just giving someone a little bit more. It's an accommodation. But then liberation is just taking away those barriers and then including everyone. Being equal and having removed that is inclusion. And that's really what we strive for as a business. It's not a common practice in our industry yet, but we are starting to actually teach more agencies to do this as well. We've very much focused to testing and training. And then just a little plug for me. We have a little online course. If you want to use a code, it's in the handout. It will give you 15% off. Don't feel pressured to do it, but it's a little plug for me. And it's very much the basics. If you have some knowledge, you'll still learn. If you have no knowledge, you will learn. If you are a graphic designer, if you are a communicator, if you are a PR, if you are a writer, some people have taken that are HR and ops managers, you will all come away with something from this. And then, yeah, the last screen. Oh, sorry, I'm reading it. There it is. There's a little bit about my course. So it is self-paced, and you get 30 days to use it. And if you go to the last screen, thank you. That's just my little quote. And I appreciate everyone's time today. I went a little faster than usual, but I figured there might be more questions.
Jolene, that was amazing. Thank you. It was so rich with information and insight and experience. So thank you. So do we have any questions? Feel free to put your hand up with the reactions button or type it into the chat and we will get that to. Can you share the webinar you suggested by your partner colleague a few minutes ago, or her name
Sure
and can
can.
look her?
Yeah, and it will also be on the handout, but I'll put it in the chat here. So Kelly and I pretty much partner on everything now. You may see us become one at some point because we just do everything together. She's awesome. She's in Winnipeg. So she's got quite a few different courses. Hers are not self-paced. She teaches them. Her past life is as an instructor, but her courses are very insightful. We both met at Odin, and we were both facilitators and instructors at Odin. And so she's got quite a few courses, and I will say I had some input on those courses too. So I'm still involved in those in some ways.
Anybody else? I have a question. Oh, somebody here. I'm looking forward to learning more about alt text, use of colors, and more specifics about those recommendations. I'll have to check out your course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I think you've covered most of these, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you're a festival or event or an organization, how can you ensure it's accessible through digital products?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you went through some of that, but
I think it starts with your website. I mean, for sure, for everyone, it's going to start with your website. I know I mentioned the overlay thing because I know most people are going to start with their website. If any of you have those on your website, I will encourage you to think about how you can remove it, working with your developer over time to correct the issues. There are some tools that I can help you with to take a look at what the problems are. We don't do the fixing of websites in-house at this point, but there's certainly other options. So I think trying to figure out where the issues are that are making your website inaccessible, even just taking a quick look at it might not be a bad idea. Any type of documents that you're sending out, if you have people, like application forms particularly, I'm trying to think of this one example. So it's going to be a municipal example, but it's a good example to think about if you have anyone going to your website to download something. So one of our websites that we tested was for a municipality. And one of the scenarios was they wanted my lead auditor, who's blind and uses JAWS, to download find the building permit and be able to fill it out. So he got to it, and it was a PDF that he had to download, and then he had to fill it out, and then he had to email it. So think about this from a blind person's perspective. That's not going to be possible. But does a blind person not have the opportunity to download a building permit? Are they not capable of doing that? Are they not, managing the build of that? It's not true. So I think, if you think about it in those cases, it was a PDF, and PDFs inherently, if you're just making one and exporting it from whatever software you're in, it's not accessible. There is special things that have to be done to it. We generally do that in Adobe Acrobat, or there's specific software that you can purchase and get trained on. There's things like Equidocs, Common Look. They do batch it a little bit faster if you have tons of documents, but forms inherently are difficult. If someone is not able to see, they're not going to print out the form and fill it out by hand. They're going to want to be able to do it on their computer. And many people who have visual impairments are very savvy on the computer, but they're blocked by the lack of technology. So if you have any kind of application forms or info for them to download, the best thing you can do is have it in live text on your website so they can highlight it. And if it's not in columns or rows or fancy tables, keeping it clean and simple is very much, without worrying about the programming of accessibility, is your best option. If you're doing online events, asking people in advance of if they require accommodations is better than coming back and someone coming to your event and saying, well, I needed an interpreter or I needed captions. Be proactive and ask in advance, because It is expensive for certain types. If you're going to have those captionings or having an interpreter, but if you've asked already and nobody's requested, you don't have to pay for it. Or there is laws if it's unforeseen circumstances and it's out of the budget. You can offer to provide the transcript, or they can bring their own interpreter, and you don't ask them to pay for the second person if they have someone to work with them. So I think just trying to change your thinking processes, and remembering that disability is a big chunk of the population and how we can make sure that everyone's included. I think those are probably the big things I would think of right away. In the handout, we talk about some physical things as well. Jillian from our team has been working with the government and a nonprofit for about 25 years. And a lot of that list, I think, is from her. So there's some physical also. People with guide dogs, scent-free rooms, that kind of thing. Those are things to think about now. There's a lot more people with the environmental sensitivity issues. This whole hospital, as I said, I'm at Sick Kids. It's a completely scent-free. Do I think it's completely scent-free? No, but it is posted everywhere. No latex balloons, things like that. But it's different for every event. Like this is an international hospital, so quite different.
Yeah, that whole scent thing. I have a problem with scents. And I was at a convention last week, and I happened to sit behind somebody who had just like hit herself with a whole bunch of perfume, and I had to go and relocate because I was feeling really sick. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. Even that is just interesting. Okay, so if we're not accessible, what happens or what could happen?
So depending where you are, I mean, you're always going to be faced with the opportunity for a fine or a complaint or someone saying nasty things negatively about you in social media, which nobody wants. Specifically in Ontario, you saw maybe briefly on the one screen that the fines alone can be $100,000 a day. Up to the Accessible Canada Act is $250,000 a day. So it's a lot. But I will tell you, they're going to give you the opportunity to fix it first. And if you are being proactive and including that, it's probably not going to happen. If you are in the United States, that's a different story. There are lawsuits left and right. Accessibrand, and my mission is not to have been able to lead. I don't want to lead with litigation and lawsuits because I don't think anyone learns anything from it, to be quite fair. They're looking for the quick fix, like those overlays, like Accessibi and AudioEye and things like that. Those names might seem familiar to you. Then people choose that rather than trying to understand from an empathetic perspective why we should include it. I mean, some of you today might have disabilities and never thought of it or didn't want to admit it because you just thought, well, that's the way it is. Creating tools that work for everybody is not special. It's not like, accommodations don't make you special. It just means you're giving the tools that you can do what you need to do as a person. I struggled with my own diagnosis for 2 years. I'm not disabled enough. My own daughter struggles with that because of the society, like the sort of the perception of people. She has dwarfism. She's a little person. Well, she's here. She sees kids way sicker than her. And she's like, oh, I'm not so bad. But I'm like, it doesn't matter. We all have our own journeys. We all have our own things. Mental health is a journey. Mental health is a disability. Like these are things that we need to be thoughtful of. And I think by making your materials more intentional and more thoughtful, it's just going to make you more successful as an organization anyways, because people are going to go, oh, look, they're offering this. It makes you look good. And you're going to bring in more income, because as soon as you say, no, I'm not doing that, the friends and the family are going to say, well, I'm not going to do that. And then you're going to push people away from your organization or your event.
So, that's a good point. I mean, if let's use you as an example with your daughter. If an organization is not accommodating, and I'm not even talking physically, but digitally, the whole family could leave. Like the whole family could not use that product or service because it's not serving somebody in their family.
Yeah, I think it's small things too. So my daughter is also a competitive synchronized swimmer for athletes with disabilities. And we were in a Pan Am Center at Markham, actually not far from here, a few years ago. And she swims with adapted kids. So there's one with a walker, there's one with a wheelchair. Joy sometimes uses crutches, and they're winning for second, third place. So they go up to the podium. Guess what? It's a podium. Somebody had to pick her up and put her on it. That's unnecessary. These are things that we can very simply fix. And there's the age old saying, well, this is how we've always done it. But if that person was well enough to compete and gain gold medal, you wouldn't do that to a Paralympian. You just wouldn't. These are kids and they deserve that same respect. So what they did is they made it like a cutout, and it's for second and third, and it's flat. And then behind it is just the floor. Why do we? It's about, I think, changing old perspectives and trying to come up with new options. And it was a very simple thing. And you know what? More cost effective at the end rather than building a podium. They've made 3 banners at different sizes. And we talked to the kids about how they felt about that. And they said it's embarrassing. You know, I've just put all this effort into being an athlete, and then I'm not able to get my award. So if you think about that for any of your events, it's the same type of principles. You show up to something and you go, I can't go on it. I can't do it. If you have speakers coming to a stage, make sure your stages have ramps. Like, maybe you didn't ask if your speakers have disabilities. I mean, most speakers, I think, tell you, but like there's those elements, and you've seen it at like the Golden Globes or the Emmys. I can't remember which one it was, but that person, I think it was Thelma Blair, because she has MS now, and Christina Applegate, they used canes, and they really, like, the stage wasn't super friendly. So as we all progress, as we all are doing this longer, and I still forget too sometimes, it's just a matter of making it part of your thinking. And once you do that, it becomes sort of second nature. It took me a good 5 years to stop forgetting old habits. I won't lie, like it's not an easy fix. But if you have a checklist, make it a checklist. Actually, if you go to our website and sign up for our e-newsletter, I promise you I don't send very many out, but there is a downloadable checklist right from our website. It's in the top right-hand corner or pop-up. And we do have a checklist there, and it gives you some ideas. And if you don't want to do that, ask for it, and I'm happy to send that. But I also sent another handout with it's just a Word document. It's not fancy, but it gives you some ideas.
And I can get that out to everyone who registered for the session. I'll forward it on behalf of Jolene. So there's a couple of comments in here. Videos. Linda said videos are a good idea with creating. Are videos a good idea with creating social media posts?
That's a great question. So yes, they can be. And I will tell you, most people, like, the statistics of watching video now is massive, especially with the younger generation, but even situational, where if you think about it, you might not be deaf, but you're using captions because you're in a place where you can't hear. Even like today, like I'm probably disturbing other people because I'm talking loud, but you know, they can put in their headphones. The only problem, if you're gonna embed a video in a social media post, put it on your YouTube channel first, because when you embed it into Facebook particularly, it doesn't have the closed captioning and the options for translation or transcript. So always use YouTube as your player and embed your URL link from YouTube into your post, because in YouTube, you can then add the transcription and you can have them select closed captioning if they want. Another thing with videos too is a lot of people are doing really cool kinetic type video that has words on screen and music, but then there's no closed captioning. So you still need to add closed captioning for someone who can't see that. So that's something to think about. But video is great, it really is, because it gives multiple options.
Thank you for that, Jolene, and for the question, Linda. Nora said, I love the idea of asking someone to review the same way we would ask someone to test a wheelchair ramp or the location of the push button of a door. So that's great. You know what? This is even simpler, I think, anyway. You know, when I write something to send out to our community, I have a second set of eyes on it. Like, it's as simple as that, right? It's like, did I get everything that we talked about? Is the grammar right? You know, I love what you said earlier too about plain language. So, you know, those are all things that I do as a as an able person. So
Yeah.
I don't know, that's really great.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I was just going to say too, as a social enterprise, one of the things that's important for us is making sure that we hire back into the disability community and offer opportunities for employment. And we are also, this is not a sales pitch by any means, but it's even something for you to think about, enabling people to have those opinions and paying them, $20 to $30 an hour or whatever for an hour of their time. We pay $50 an hour minimum actually for anybody, but having people with on the autism spectrum disorder or cognitive, asking them, do you understand this? Like if it's directed towards them, if it's something that they're part of to live independently or to participate, it's not really much out of your budget.
Thanks, that's great. So Claire had to leave, but she said great information. Linda said great advice, thanks. And Nicole from town of Pictou, I hope I pronounced that right. You provided lots of practical and simple tips for our town. Some things I don't think of, some I don't know about. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love what I do. It's changed my life. I'm not gonna lie. It's 100% where I belong, and it's been awesome to be able to provide other job opportunities. And I think about that all the time. Statistically, people with disabilities are the most underemployed, and if you read the news, they don't get paid very much. And unfortunately, a lot of people are choosing MAID, and it goes down the societal stream. So if we start changing how we do things on the business end, I think we'll see that shift. We'll stop thinking that people with disabilities can't work, and COVID also helped with that. So I'm glad that I can share the information that I do. It's not necessarily about just bringing business in for me. It's about, making people's perceptions change. So
Wonderful, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions, comments? All right. Well, if you're okay with it, we can end the meeting. We still have 10 minutes, but if there's no other questions or comments, I want to thank Jolene. First, thank you so much for doing this for us and doing it in a hospital. So thank you for taking that time. And I know it's a little challenge. It's been a challenging few weeks for you, but thank you
you
so
know
much.
what? We're on the upside of things now. So I
Good.
thank you for all letting me change it from the 11th, because they scheduled her surgery that day, to moving it today.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think the information was amazing. Nora, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you again for allowing us to participate with you and share our experience with you and building up the East Coast.
Thank you. Yeah, some excellent information. Thank you so much, Jolene. And I was lucky enough to have a little sneak peek of the handout that she mentioned, and there were some really great tips in that handout, that things that you could start doing right away. One of the things I remember reading was, just having pen and paper available if you have a place where people are going to be ordering or registering, so that someone can write it down if they need to. So little tips like that. And I think you're right. If we just start and start thinking,
Yeah.
you're right. It's overwhelming. What do we do? How do we get going? But I think it's the message of just start and just try to think a little bit about accessibility and how to make things more inclusive. And that's where you start. You just start giving it more thought. So I really appreciate that those thoughts, and everything that you shared was an excellent session. So thanks to you, and thanks to Debbie and FEO team, and also thanks to everyone for joining this morning.